Hello everyone and welcome for this new episode of Teach Yourself to Draw, a drawing series dedicated to self-education. In this episode we are going to see the 5 fundamental stages of realistic drawing. Alright, so all the idea of the Teach Yourself to Draw series is that you can go to my website, download the resources, and do the exercises on your own. Or you can use your own material, but I really think that for this one, it's pretty much the best thing you can have. This is a very good reproduction that I found on the Harvard Museum. So if you have some time, if you need to find resources, drawings to copy, anything, you can go to the Harvard Museum. I'll leave a link in the description. Alright, so let's jump right into the drawing. In this video, we are going to explain the different stages that were created to help students improve at drawing. Once you reach a certain level, you might not need to follow these stages anymore. So just remember that this is not necessarily how all the drawings should be made. It's just a better way to learn. So these are the 5 stages: blocking, massing, modeling, rendering, and finishing. Alright, so the first phase is the blocking. It's the linear phase of the drawing. Everything at this stage consists of empty lines plus the plumb line. All the structure and construction lines are in this blocking stage. And this stage is all about proportions. It's strictly a 2D phase, so you want to keep things as flat as possible in your imagination. And, well, basically, it's called blocking because you want to draw a block, some type of box, for every shadow shape, but you don't fill it in. It's just like drawing a map of a continent or anything like this. It's a geometrical envelope, so you want to keep things as straight as possible and avoid curves, and you don't fill in the shapes, right? For self-evaluation at this stage, what you need to do is check the proportions. So if you need, I made a video, complete video on this very subject. So you need to check for top and bottom, left and right, and check for the placement of the key anchor points in relation to the plumb line, for instance. And you only want to go to the next phase after you've made sure that the main points, the main lines and shapes have the right size, placement, and proportions. Just make sure you check everything, you correct everything before you can move on to the next phase. The second phase is the massing, and this phase is a transitional stage between 2D and 3D. You're slowly going from lines only, so in the blocking, to values. However, this stage is not about values, not yet. So it's still about proportions and shapes. The goal is simply to make checking for proportions easier by separating light and shadow. So you want to separate lights and shadows. Light on one side, shadow on the other side. Have you ever looked at a transfer drawing made from a photo and thought, well, it looks weird, right? It has the right proportions because it's been made with a transfer paper, but because it's only lines with empty spaces in between, it's hard to see clearly and to really find any type of real likeness. It looks weird. And it's because our vision doesn't function with lines. Lines are mostly a creation of our brain to help us conceptualize and find a structure in the visible world. But visually, lines are not enough for realistic drawings. And it's because our vision works with masses of values instead of lines. So you see big shadow shapes. You don't see lines. Lines are a creation of our imagination, a creation of our brain. They don't exist. We conceptualize the lines, but we see the big masses of values. We see the shadows. So this stage, the mass-in, has this idea in mind. The idea is to apply a light, even values on all the parts that are in the shadow. So basically you want to divide the drawing in two. You have two opposite sides, light and shadow. That's it. Two values, and it doesn't matter how dark you make the shadows. Don't make them dark, just make them light and something even. So everything has this one value. So you want to be very, very soft with your pencil and just cover it with a thin veil of value. You don't want to go too dark because, well, you don't want to erase that much after you're done, and you don't want to go too light because you still want to keep it very separated from the light values. Ultimately, the goal of this stage is that once everything is covered, you check the proportions and you correct the shapes again. Yes, that's it. You think the proportions are all about the blocking, but no, they are also about the massing. They are happening right here during this phase. And you'll see that at this stage, you have so many things that you couldn't see properly with only lines in the blocking stage, because you needed some type of value, of indication of values to clearly understand the shapes, to clearly see the proportions. So working simply with lines was good enough to get the fundamental structure, but now you need to have some type of indication of value. Otherwise, your eyes will never see the shapes clearly enough to be very precise and accurate and reach the level of accuracy that you desire. And before we move on to the next phase, if you like this video and if you want to see more, you have to know that this is only possible because of the support that I receive on Patreon. So a huge thank you to all my patrons. By becoming a patron, you'll have access to the real-time uncut versions of these demonstrations with extra commentary. So you have a lot more information. Plus, you'll see a lot of extra content behind the scene of my paintings, my material, and stuff like that. So thank you for checking my Patreon. Let's go back to the drawing. The third stage is about halftones or modeling. So at this stage, you want to start incorporating values. Yeah, finally, halftones basically start when half of your drawing is completed. Well, that's an easy way to remember this phase and when it's supposed to happen. And you're going to start modeling, basically. You're going to start including volume in the drawing. And this is where you really transition into the 3D phase. So you just started in the beginning with two values, light and dark, but now you are going to start incorporating halftones. So you want to describe as well as possible all the nuances between the darkest parts and the lightest parts. And generally, it's better to start with the darkest part. So you want to key the drawing by first implementing the darkest parts and then slowly building all the values around them. And you want to darken all the parts that need to be darkened. And yeah, basically what you want to do is try to create a realistic impression of volume, and you want to be very precise with how dark and how light the values are. You want to work from the darkest to the lightest, and when you work with graphite, this stage is kind of a long process because, well, you need to darken a lot. So at this point you need to use a lot of graphite. For a self-evaluation at this stage, you want to make sure that the values are correct. So use all the things you can to check the values. Use a black mirror or your smartphone, squint a lot, and make sure that you have all the values as precisely as possible before you move on to the next phase. The next phase is what I call the rendering or turning the form, and this is where you are going to really start focusing on edges. You want to start working on soft edges, lost edges, hard edges, and you want to remove all traces of lines that might still be around, except right here for me on this graphite drawing, because I work on a white background, so I'm going to leave just the outline to indicate the silhouette of this drawing. But for all the other lines that I have inside of the drawing, I want to get rid of these lines as much as possible and replace them by just indication of value, going from the darkest to the lightest, and really working on all the transitions. At this point, you want to remove all the tiny bits of graphite that might be annoying, like creating like tiny imperfections. At this point, you want to be as accurate as possible with the values and just make sure that everything is as descriptive and detailed as possible. This is really when you want to start going into the details, especially for the values. You want to check everything, make sure all your values are correct. Use a black mirror. Make sure that everything is soft. If you need to blend, like I do with a brush generally, this is where you want to do it. For self-evaluation at this stage, the idea is mostly to look all over the drawing and make sure that it looks just like the model, and you are trying to create something that's as close to a copy as possible. This stage, well, very simply, you just want to work on the accents, the tiny details, all the things that you might have overlooked up until this point because, well, they were not really that important. The texture. Now you want to work on, these tiny highlights that are really hard to spot. All these tiny things that are really icing on the cake, to be honest, not necessarily crucial, to be honest, depending on the level of detail that you want. But if you're really interested in details, that's when you make them, not before. You don't want to go too much into details and realize later that you have everything to correct. So first it's blocking, massing, halftones, rendering, and the details are happening only now. What you want to do at this point is correct all the tiny nuances and just make sure that the drawing has the visual appearance that you want as your final result. Alright, so I hope that these 5 stages will help you. Remember, blocking, massing, modeling, rendering, and finishing. And these are the 5 stages of realistic drawings. I'll cover my process in more detail in the next episodes. I just wanted to have this first one to be an overview of the entire process, and I still think that just having this structure in mind can really help you tremendously, especially the massing, which is a phase of a drawing that's crucial and that many people generally overlook. You don't want to go too far into modeling and halftones and values before you start checking for proportions again with the massing. This is a really important stage. So we'll see other techniques in the next episodes. We still have the second son of the Laocoon and of course the wonderful sculpture of the bearded man, the Laocoon himself. As always, don't hesitate to leave a like, subscribe and share. I'll see you in the next episode. Until then, have fun drawing. Bye.